That night, I realized I was done with my family. When I have replayed that night in my head so many times that the details are seared into me, and yet every time I think about it, I feel the same mix of disbelief, anger, and finally, a sense of clarity. That night, something shifted. Something inside me finally snapped, and I realized that the family I had always thought I could rely on was not the family I had imagined. It started like any normal evening. I had come home after a long week at work, exhausted, but looking forward to a family dinner. My parents had invited me, insisting it was important for us all to be together. My brother, who I will admit has always been the favorite, was already there, lounging comfortably in the living room, scrolling through his phone. I noticed the familiar aura, the sense that everything in that house revolved around him, even now as an adult. Dinner itself was uneventful at first. My mom was fussing over dishes, my dad was talking about his work, and my brother was, as usual, chiming in occasionally but mostly comfortable in his own world. The tension started subtly. My parents began talking about money, unexpectedly, as though I had become their bank account overnight. They mentioned bills they couldn't pay, debts that had accumulated, and plans they had ruined for the future. I listened carefully, thinking maybe this was just another temporary setback. Maybe they needed some advice, maybe a solution I could provide. I didn't realize at first that it was a test, one I wasn't going to pass. The shock came when my mom turned to me directly, without even a moment's hesitation, and said, "We're calling you because we need your help." My brother looked up from his phone, nodded lazily, and went back to scrolling. The words hit me like a punch. "We need your help." Not a hint of asking, not a suggestion. They weren't coming to me with an option. They were presenting a fact, a demand disguised as desperation. It was in that instant that I realized something that had been building for years. I had been their go-to solution for every problem, their invisible safety net, the one they could rely on when everything else failed. And my brother, as usual, would continue living his life untouched by consequence. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice calm. "Have you asked him?" I said, pointing to my brother. There was a pause so long that I could feel every second of it. My dad's fork clinked against the plate. My mother's hand trembled slightly as she placed hers down. Finally, my mom said quietly, "We didn't want to burden him. He's already stressed." I felt like the floor dropped out from under me. Everything finally clicked. Every sacrifice, every quiet struggle, every time I had held myself together while they coddled him, every decision I made to stay silent or compromise for the sake of family peace. It had all led to this moment. They had spent decades protecting him, shielding him, giving him everything. And now, when they were faced with consequences, they turned to me. That night, I realized I was done. I realized that no matter how much I gave, no matter how responsible I had been, I would never be treated with the same consideration. I had spent my entire life absorbing the imbalance, pretending it didn't hurt, pretending their favoritism was normal, and pretending that someday it would all make sense. But it never did. I sat there for what felt like hours, letting the silence stretch. My brother had no reaction beyond a shrug. My parents, seeing my shock, tried to explain themselves. They talked about stress, about financial mistakes, about bad luck. But every excuse sounded hollow. I realized that the pattern was clear. Their priorities had always been about protecting him and leaving me to manage everything else. In that moment, a wave of anger swept over me. Not just anger, but grief. Grief for the years I had spent thinking that family meant fairness, that love meant equality. Grief for the moments I had missed, the sacrifices I had made silently, the nights I had cried alone after seeing my brother get everything I wanted. It was overwhelming. But mixed in with that grief was a strange clarity, the first sense of liberation I had ever felt. I finally spoke. I told them firmly but carefully that I could not help, that I would not. The room went silent, and I could see the disbelief in their faces. My brother looked confused, as though he genuinely couldn't understand why I would refuse. My mother's eyes filled with tears and my father's face hardened. They tried guilt, tried emotional manipulation, tried every tactic I had seen used on me for years. But this time, I held my ground. I thought back to every single moment I had sacrificed for them, for him. Every time I had paid for something out of my own pocket, every time I had adjusted my life so theirs could be easier, every time I had been quiet when I should have spoken, every time I had forgone my own needs so that theirs were met. It was a long, exhausting list. And for what? For the system to continue, unchanged, and for me to be the one left holding the pieces? I realized that was never going to change. It would never be fair. And so, finally, I chose myself. The rest of that night was tense. My parents left the room, claiming they needed to discuss things privately. My brother went to his room, still scrolling, still oblivious. I sat there, feeling a mix of relief, sadness, and anger. I couldn't cry. I was too exhausted. But I knew that from that moment on, things would be different. I would no longer be the silent absorber of their problems, the one who quietly sacrificed everything. I would no longer allow their favoritism to dictate my life. The weeks that followed were complicated. My parents tried to reach out, tried to negotiate, tried to make me feel guilty. My brother continued living his life as usual, occasionally throwing me a passive-aggressive comment about family responsibility. But I stayed firm. I realized that this was not just about money or logistics. It was about boundaries, about self-respect, about refusing to be treated like a permanent backup plan. I won't lie, there were moments of doubt. Guilt crept in, whispering that maybe I was wrong, maybe I should help, maybe family meant unconditional support. But every time I considered it, I remembered that night. I remembered the clarity I felt when I realized that nothing I had done in the past had changed the system. I remembered that my parents had spent decades shielding him while expecting me to bear the weight of their choices. I remembered that my brother had never faced real consequences, and they had always turned to me when it mattered. That night, I learned something essential. Choosing yourself is not selfish. Protecting your own life and sanity is not betrayal. And family, no matter how close or blood-related, can only be fair if boundaries are enforced. I finally understood that my family dynamic had always been unbalanced, and that I could no longer participate in it without sacrificing myself completely. Since then, things have shifted. I've limited contact. I focus on my own life, my marriage, my finances, and my well-being. My parents still call occasionally, and my brother still expects something from me, but I've learned to hold my ground. That night gave me a clarity I had never experienced before, a freedom I didn't realize I needed. I realized that sometimes walking away is the only way to preserve yourself. I realized that family doesn't always equal fairness, and love doesn't always mean support. Most importantly, I realized that life is too short to keep sacrificing for people who will never reciprocate, who will never even acknowledge the imbalance, and who will always turn to you when it suits them. That night, I realized I was done. And for the first time, I felt like I could finally breathe, like I could finally